Thanks, Liz. And thank you to all of our presenters. That was a lot of information and great work. So I hope that you have questions and thoughts that you'd like to share, and we have some time to do that. Is there anyone?
I've got it.
Oh, you have some questions?
I do.
Okay.
Okay. So the first question is, what is an example of a label on the animal side that does not represent judicious use?
Anybody
Okay, no takers.
No, I'm not sure I can. Is that working? I think maybe that's part of the challenge. Is there's nothing that says it's a hard concept to communicate, and I think as was pointed out in one of the earlier panels, the assumption is if it doesn't say no antibiotics, then it means all antibiotics, and. Yeah, I mean, I think the whole label thing is confusing. I don't have a clear answer for that other than ideally we bring everybody to a place of judicious use, and that's where, and society or consumer understands that that's the norm. But the label thing is confusing.
Kathy, I think they were talking about the report you mentioned.
Oh, I'm sorry. Which?
You talked about a report where 30% of labels were not.
Gotcha. Sorry. Thank you for the clarification. When we looked at the FDA existing labels, for example, there are many labels, as I think others have recognized, that don't have duration limits on them, and that doesn't meet judicious use principles. There are some that have indications such as maintaining weight during times of stress, and whether or not that's a medical indication. So things like that are the ones that we evaluated.
We also have a second question here. I'm not sure I totally understand it. Do you know what group or funding was behind getting all antibiotic use per the last 12 months reported with no FOIA protection?
Sorry. I think you're referencing one of the Illinois Senate bill that had been proposed.
Could be. I'm just reading the question. But
okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So that Illinois bill would require animal producers to file an annual report with the state, indicating, what animals received what antibiotics at what dose for what indications for what duration of time, and the farmer would have to file that report for every single animal they treated over a 12-month period with the state. And the information that they gave to the state in Illinois would not have been protected from Freedom of Information requests, which means that any individual would have been able to go in, pull that farmer's records, and see exactly what animals got what, why, and AVMA feels that that's type of information. I mean, that belongs to the producer, and that should be protected. And that was our position on that. So there was no organization providing funds for that. That was just a proposed piece of legislation in Illinois, which is not done yet. I believe they're actually discussing it tomorrow. So it hasn't gone away. But it is a proposed piece of legislation in Illinois. Does that answer your question?
Okay, any questions in the audience?
I've got another one if we don't. Yep. The definitions of stewardship and responsible use are abstract. When faced with needing to treat an animal, how does a vet choose among the available antibiotics?
Sure.
Okay. So that was one of the things that confused us. What's the difference between stewardship versus judicious use? Stewardship is, and at least in the AVMA's opinion, everything you can do to help prevent disease and try and not have to use antibiotics, right? So what can we do to the environment, in our management practices, in our nutrition, in our vaccination program to try and prevent disease? Judicious use kicks in when the animal still gets sick, and we've made the decision at this time, we need to use an antibiotic. And that's when, in our opinion, judicious use kicks in. And that's where what disease am I looking at? What antibiotic am I going to use? At what dose? For how long? Now, it gets further complicated in animal agriculture because you have some labels that you cannot stray from. But in our opinion, that's where the judicious use comes into play.
Yeah, and I'll just add on, if we looked at our guidelines and principles, it included things like knowing a clinical history, having a clinical diagnosis, doing microbiology when needed, reevaluating, evaluating outcomes and then reevaluating the continued need to use antimicrobials. So it comes down to what most veterinary students learn in microbiology. It's just putting all of that into practice.
Looking for questions. I will ask one while we're waiting. Liz, this is for you, and this is my opportunity to learn something. The Truckers Quality Assurance Certification tell us a little bit about that.
So TQA, a lot of what's driven some of the changes in the pork industry have been based on some of the videos that were mentioned in the panel previously. And so the importance of bringing an animal to market in a healthy condition, stress them as little as possible, as well as minimize the carriage of disease, included developing a program that talks about animal handling, how many animals should be loaded in a group, how to move them, the use of any types of electronic equipment to try to move them, and trying to restrict those uses of some of those issues or some of those instruments, and then also things like cleanliness of the truck, trying to make sure that you're not spreading disease. So it's a program that was one of our first education programs that required they pass a test. And now virtually every packer, as part of their animal handling plans that they have with the USDA, requires that training of the truckers that deliver animals to their farm or to their packing plants.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. We're good? Out of time?
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
We got time for maybe one more.
But could I share one thing?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Please, Joe.
One thing I wanted to share that I didn't at the end of my portion of it was that the efforts we've done with, though it's called the Pew Farm Foundation Antibiotic Discussion Group, the Farm Foundation and Pew were the conveners. Participants, yes, but conveners. And they have not been the drivers of this conversation. The drivers of the conversation has been the participants of the group, from the pharmaceutical, from the producers, from the livestock groups, from the retailers, and from the food service side. So that's a very important part of it. If I think back 2 years ago, and would have I been up here sitting next to Kathy at this point, and where we're at now, I would have said probably no. So that's how far we've come in 2 years. And I think 2 years is a long time, but we weren't starting from ground zero. You heard from Liz up here that a lot of good work had been done in basically segments, from the pork to the beef to the feathered groups, from the retailers, from the processors, etc. What we did, it was hard work, but it was also, when you think about it, wasn't that hard. We actually took all the materials that these groups had put together and actually put them up on boards. When we did the stewardship definition, we took all the common words that we found from the people that were in the room, from the processors, producers, pharma, etc., and there was a lot of commonalities in there. And once we did that, we rattled out a definition in a pretty short time. It wasn't that hard. And then when you start talking about the principle side, we took all the commonalities from the principles, we started hammering out what does that look like. And you'd be surprised how quickly we got to these things. So I go back to what I said before. It is a conversation with participants. I think this is the first time that you've brought these groups together that are on the ground every day, to come up with a framework around antibiotic stewardship that brings a comprehensive approach, taking everybody's thing. My dream about this thing is, once we announce this, is that when people look at that stewardship definition and look at the principles around it, it will be broadly used. If you go to Hormel's website, if you go to Smithfield's website, if you go to McDonald's website, you'll see basically, I think, what we've come up with. Now, it may be a big, hairy dream, but I think it's possible. And I think that brings consistency to what we're trying to get done here together.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our presenters.